All right. Hello, everyone. I think we are starting. My name is David E., and I am the co-founder of the beauty brand Good Light. It's a gender-inclusive beauty brand, and also the author of the upcoming book Pretty Boys, which hits shelves June 22nd. Yes, I got the date right. And I am so honored and so privileged to have this conversation with Jonathan Parks-Ramage, which rhymes with damage. I just got that right. And Unabridged Bookstore in Chicago, which we'll have to visit. But we are here to celebrate Yes, Daddy. Yes, Daddy is one of my personal favorite books that I squealed when I read The Galley. I got it about 3 months ago, and this book was not only terrifying, but it was beautiful. It made me cry. It uplifted me. And I almost felt like I was in these areas because I know people who are in this book, like not literally because it's fiction, but it seems like
Yes,
you know
thank
people
God.
in this book. But without further ado, I would love to introduce Jonathan Parks Ramage. And his writing has been widely published in such outlets as Vice, Slate, Out, W, Atlas Obscura, Broadly, and L, Casual. He is an alumnus of the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, and he lives in Los Angeles with his partner, Ryan O'Connell. Yes, Daddy is his debut novel. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you. I think that was the best intro in the history of introduction. I literally could not have done a better introduction than that. So thank you, honey. Thank you for being here. It is such a
Oh,
thrill.
of course. I mean, we have so much to talk about. First things first, I mean, this is an amazing debut. I cannot believe that this is a debut novel from someone. Can you talk to me about what the process was like? I mean, how long did this take? Did you have to kind of think about every chapter beforehand? Like, how did this come about?
Yeah, well, I mean, it started, I think, as an inkling. I mean, it's definitely personal, not autobiographical, but there was this kind of time that I lived through in New York in my early 20s, which thank God she's now in her late 30s. So those days are well behind me. But there was this period in my early 20s where I was really lost. I was dating much older, wealthier men. I was working in a restaurant where I was being continually sexually harassed. And so all of these factors were kind of happening in my personal life in my 20s. And I think I wanted to kind of explore that kind of internal terrain through the lens of fiction as a way, I think, of kind of processing that kind of formative period of my life where I was dating these older kind of wealthy men and seeking, love and validation in all the wrong places. So I mean, that's what really was the kernel of the idea. And then, I mean, I started writing it in 2016, at like the end of 2016. So it was definitely a long kind of gestation and like a long road in terms of writing the book. As I mean, you've written a book, honey. It's like it's a journey. It is a journey,
It is a
and
journey. It's a
it
feat.
it is a feat. It is a feat, and I think also when you first start writing it, it takes a lot of courage to say, like, you know what, I'm gonna write a 300-page book and just hope things work out for the best. So I think that, I think it's really important. I mean, I found something that I was so passionate about, and I knew, and it was so personal to me that I knew that I would have kind of the passion and the stamina and tenacity that it takes to ultimately get it to publication, 5 years later.
Which I want to get into. But first, for those of you who haven't read Yes, Daddy, please do. It's the juiciest read of the summer, if not the year. But Jonathan, can you kind of give us the synopsis of what Yes, Daddy is about?
Yeah, totally. So, Yes, Daddy is about a young, aspiring playwright. He moves to New York. He's broke. He's estranged from his family. He grew up in an evangelical background. His parents aren't very supportive. And so he's lost. He moves to New York City. He's lost. And he winds up getting in a relationship with a much older, wealthy, famous playwright. And at first, he's kind of drawn into this world of like glittering wealth and privilege and kind of artistic success, and he's so dazzled by it. But the older famous writer invites him out to his Hamptons compound for the summer, where things take a very dark turn.
When we say dark turn, we're talking about sadistic, evil, dark turn, which I personally loved. It was terrifying reading this book. But where is it that you got these dark ideas? I mean, how did these ideas come into your mind, and how did you get those kind of situations in the plot line to cement into this novel?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was I wanted to, I mean, so the younger writers lured into this web of sexual abuse and assault. And one of the issues that I wanted to explore was sexual abuse and assault, the Me Too movement within a queer context, and
Mm,
specifically in this book, a gay male context, because
yes.
I do often feel like queer and trans victims of sexual assault are pushed to the margins of the conversation, and I feel like those stories need to be represented and need to be centered. And so I hope that this book can be kind of a part of that centering. So I really wanted to explore that dark territory because I think it's important. And so that was the impetus behind it. And then, in terms of the model for the book, I mean, all the things that happen are dark, but I definitely modeled them after real life situations. So I mean,
Wow.
I think that the character of the kind of the web he's pulled into is very similar to what happened with Bryan Singer. Who,
Mm-hmm.
for those of you who don't know, Bryan Singer is a very famous Hollywood director. He directed many episodes in the X-Men franchise, and for years there were kind of whispers about these massive kind of parties he would throw and this network of abusers that he essentially enabled. And there was
Wow.
kind of this Hollywood sexual abuse ring among gay men. And a lot of those, it took years and years for those stories to actually get heard in a real
Mm-hmm.
way and for him to face any sort of repercussions.
Yep.
And so that was hugely influential. The Jeffrey Epstein story was hugely influential. I mean,
Wow.
obviously, all the stories during the Me Too movement, we saw how wealth can breed this kind of horrific power, which can be abused in a way which really damages victims. So yeah, I mean, I think that the darkness, I wanted it to feel grounded in a real social issue and model after, real world monsters, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Which is terrifying to know that this isn't just fictional. Like, this happens in real life, and it also happens in gay culture, right? Abuse and power. And I love that you explore that. You explore it through the eyes of this newbie, this young person who is highly ambitious and wants to further their career, but thinks that they have to perhaps climb the ladder through utilizing someone else who's more established. And that reminded me a lot of friends that I had in my early 20s too, who are that desperate to find fame and fortune that they would almost do anything. I mean, how was that, those stories, those real stories? I mean, how did that affect kind of the plot line for you and the main character of Jonah?
Yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately I've dated a lot. I was one of those people that
Okay.
in my early 20s. I mean, I think, when I moved to New York, I started working in this restaurant. It was like a gay restaurant, which shall remain nameless. But it was kind of like an upscale. It's very similar to the restaurant in the book. It's kind of like an upscale gay Hooters where very wealthy gay men would come in, and sexual
Mm,
harassment was just kind of like the order of the day. And so
wow.
but in that, it was just kind of like I had just moved to New York and I just thought, oh, this is gay culture. And in
Mm-hmm.
order for me to advance within a gay context,
Mm,
I have to use my body as a commodity.
mm-hmm.
Which is the wrong lesson to learn, but that is kind of the lesson that I learned, and that I
Wow.
really struggled to shake for many years. And so I think that my ambition kind of got filtered through this delusion, and it wound up forcing me to seek out other people to basically uh, give me what I thought I needed to have success. It taught me to be in relationships with older men who
Mm,
I thought could hold the answer not only to love, but to my career, to, essentially my sense of identity. I was really looking toward these, quote unquote, daddies for validation, love, support, success, and I wasn't looking to myself. I think that after many years and therapy, what I learned is that you have to be your own daddy. You
Wow.
have to find that love and that validation within yourself. I mean, it's like RuPaul says, honey, if you can't love yourself, how in the hell are you going to love somebody else? But
Exactly.
I think that it's really true. And I think that that was a lesson that I really struggled to learn for so long. And that's why I did kind of attach to these kind of big, famous, wealthy figures, because I thought this is my answer instead of looking within.
I think that we need to put that on a bumper sticker, be your own daddy. I have never heard that before, and I feel so empowered. I am my own daddy. I don't need anyone else. That is so
Yes.
empowering. I mean, when it comes to this book, though, and I think what was so interesting is that it's also heart-wrenching. Even though you know that Jonah is going down the wrong path, and I want to shake him and say, no, Jonah, this is not what you do. You feel for him. You feel empathetic towards him, because at the end of the day, this abuse is happening to him out of his control. And how intentional was it for you to make him kind of a likable character or a sympathetic character?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think that I wanted him to be a complex and real character. And so, he does also a lot of things which are unlikable. And I think that
Right.
at the beginning of his journey, I mean, I think, some people in some responses kind of see him as potentially manipulative or, calculating in his designs on this older writer, but then obviously he gets in way on over his head. But, I think that part of the book is really about exploring trauma. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at, is that you see him go through all this horrific trauma. And I think that's where a lot of the sympathy and empathy comes from, because you see all that he's kind of forced to endure. And so I think when he does behave in ways which are potentially unsympathetic, I hope that you can kind of understand how the echoes of trauma that he has not dealt with lead him to move through the world in a way which potentially hurts other people, other people who are close to him, other people who want to support him. So, I think that that sympathetic aspect that you're talking about was really important, because, I wanted you to understand kind of the trauma that he's been through and how that can affect someone's behavior. It doesn't give you the right to be shitty to other people, but I think that I hope that it could help the reader understand and sympathize why he might make some poor decisions. And then ultimately, obviously he's on a journey to healing, or at least the first steps of healing, which was important for me as well. And I also think, gives him that sympathetic light that you're talking about.
What I also loved about this book is that it's unapologetically, unabashedly queer. And we're getting into queer culture like from the beginning. I mean, you're diving into it and you're not trying to shield anything. It's the good, the bad, the ugly, the traumatic. And was that really something that was important to you to make this as believable to queer culture as possible? Or did you feel like you had to hold back or maybe even fictionalize it more to make it even more dramatic?
No, I mean, I think you're exactly right. I mean, I didn't want to translate anything. I basically wanted to present queer culture, warts and all, because I do think, we're at a point where obviously we still need more representation in the media, and that is so important. But I also think that we're at a point where we have enough representation that we can afford to start looking at like negative aspects of queer culture or abusive people within queer culture, which is also really important, I think, to present queer people as, people who are capable of a wide range of human emotions and a wide range of human behavior, from beautiful to bad. And I think that that's true representation, when queer people can be fully human. And so yeah, it was really important for me for this to feel real. And so I'm so happy that that came through, because I just wanted it to feel authentic to a queer experience. And I feel also very lucky that we're in a time where queer narratives are starting to again become more and more common and more diverse, and that there's room for a lot of queer narratives kind of in our larger cultural conversation.
What also made it feel authentic is that this character of Jonah was very nuanced and also was religious, comes from a religious upbringing, which I know that LGBTQIA and religion sometimes don't mix together. But the reality is, a lot of gay men, a lot of gay people were raised into the church, and they also adopt that into their lives. And why was that something that was interesting for you to explore through the character of Jonah?
Something that I thought was really important, because I think that, Jonah is a character who grows up in the church and whose
Mhm.
faith matters to him, and
Right.
and his faith is kind of a foundational aspect of his identity. And then because he comes up in this toxic evangelical setting where he's put through conversion therapy and undergoes so much spiritual trauma, that really basically fucks with his sense of spirituality. And so one of his main struggles in life is having this deep faith, but then also having an understanding of that faith which oppresses him and tells him that he is unworthy of the love of God, essentially. And that's a really hard pill for people to swallow. And I think that sometimes people in the LGBTQIA plus community can become calloused to that and say, oh, well, why don't you just leave religion behind? Because religion isn't for
Mhm.
people. But I don't think that's the answer. I think that that's so unfair to queer people, and that there's nothing inherently homophobic about any religion. It's like, it's all about how you interpret texts and how you, can weaponize religious dogma against people, but you can also use, theology to liberate people. And so
Wow.
I think that I wanted to present someone who'd been through spiritual trauma, but still wanted to reclaim their faith in a way which didn't harm them. And I think that's still a tough message for a lot of queer people to hear, and which I get. It's like, if you're queer, you've been through some sort of shit with the church. Even if you
Right.
never directly grew up in the church, the evangelical church has had such an intense grip on our nation's politics for so
Yes.
long that the evangelical church is behind so much of the anti-LGBTQ legislation that we see in
Right.
Washington. So it is a really intense schism, but I also think it's important to create space for queer people to, if they want, find religion, find spirituality in a way which does not oppress them.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And when it comes to this book, there's just so many different genres. It's not just a queer book. That would be so reductive, right? It is literary fiction, it's thriller, it's suspense. How would you kind of describe it? Like, what section is this book in, like in bookstores?
I definitely think of it as literary fiction, but I love also playing with genre, because I
Mm,
think that genre is a way to hook people, essentially. So it's
right,
a way
right.
to kind of bring readers in and kind of hook them with a narrative that's very propulsive, in which they think they might know where it's going, but in all the
Hmm.
reviews that I've read of the book, people are always surprised by where it goes and kind of the depths of the themes that it explores. And so for me, I think genre is a way to grab readers, but then also subvert their expectations of the genre
Mm,
by drawing them into subject matter like, spiritual trauma within the evangelical church, or, the Me Too movement through a queer lens. Like, so to draw them in through these kind of recognizable tropes, but then subverting the genre and bringing them into something deeper. So it's a little bit of a bait and switch, but I also just love genre. Like
I know.
I love like bad 90s erotic thrillers. You know what I mean? So there is a part of that genre which I think is fun to play with, but again, also subvert. So it's not just, something trashy that we laugh to on our couches. It's something that uses those elements and then subverts them into and makes a narrative that's deeper.
So Jonathan, I want to know about your writing process because I cannot believe this is your debut. It's way too good to be your debut. Was there pressure involved in the writing process? How was the writing process like? I know that you said you started in 2016, but what does that look like? Was it just ideating or was it writing? Like, take us through that process.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, for me, it started as an idea for a short story.
Hmm.
And the more I wrote, I'm very long-winded just in general, but the more I wrote it, the more I was like, oh, there is something here that I really want and need to explore. And it's going to take me a lot longer than 25 pages.
Gotcha.
So it first kind of started out just as a story about a young man and his older lover, essentially. And I always knew that sexual assault was going to be a part of it. And I started writing in 2016. And then in 2017, all the kind of Me Too revelations started really gaining momentum in the media. And so then as I was writing, I was like, well, oh, this is definitely interesting and definitely adds another layer to this story. So that is kind of, I mean, for people who haven't read it, the book takes place kind of in two time periods, in 2009 and then 2017, kind of around the Harvey Weinstein revelations coming out. And so the whole kind of second chunk of the book didn't really exist in my brain as a possibility until, the Me Too movement was happening in real time. And then I was just riveted to all of these stories. And that's when it started to kind of work its way into the book. So it was definitely something that grew and changed over the years. And then I had my lovely editor at our shared publisher, and she kind of was the person to help me put the finishing touches. There was like a little bit of a restructure that happened at the last, kind of happened in the final stages of editing. It was kind of her big note was some rearranging of the timeline.
Oh,
and
wow.
I think I think it really helped the book kind of gain the immediacy I think that you feel now.
Brilliant. I mean, can you tell me about the process of even selling a book? Because there's so many people in here, I'm sure, who want to be the next Jonathan and want to write a book. I mean, how do you start with fiction? Do you have to finish a fiction? How do you get an agent? Like, what was your process like?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I started writing this book basically in order to sell a novel. You have to, especially a debut novel, you have to write the whole thing. So that, as I was saying earlier, that's like kind of the scariest part about it, is that you got to write this whole thing and it's got to be good. But I was writing, and I think that anyone who's writing, I think it's always helpful to find writers' workshops, writers' programs. You don't have to go to an MFA. Never went to an MFA. I know a lot of writers who haven't. But I think it is helpful to find a literary community where you have a writer's workshop that you start yourself, where you find a writer's workshop that you can attend. I went to the Red Loaf Writers Conference, which is fantastic because it was it's a conference of writers, and it really connects you to the publishing industry, but also to a community of really beautiful writers who are some of the best writers working today. So I was very fortunate to have that experience. And so that also helped kind of fuel my confidence that, okay, I can finish this book and someone might actually buy it. So then once you have your finished book that you've edited and gone over, and it's where you want it to be, that's when I started querying agents, which is basically just sending agents emails and saying, I think you should read my book. And a few agents were interested.
Was it
And
immediate for you, or was it like, okay, I have the first batch of agents, then I have my second batch, and like, how was that like?
well, I was fortunate to have a couple referrals
Oh, gotcha.
from friends who were authors. Again, you don't necessarily have to, though. I
Mm-hmm.
really think that there are barriers that are coming down in the publishing industry, and I just recommend that people just go for it. But I had a couple of referrals, and then a couple people I reached out to cold, a couple people I met through Breadloaf. So I did. I mean, I sent it out. I want to say to like 15 agents, and I think uh, there were a number that were interested in reading,
Wow.
and then uh, two who ultimately said they wanted to represent the manuscript.
Wow.
Um, so yeah, it was the first batch that I submitted my queries to, but that doesn't always happen, and you just need
No, it
people.
doesn't.
So if you don't get kind of the first batch, keep submitting is always my advice to writers who are in that kind of stage of looking for an agent. And then I did also work with my agent on edits to the book before we took it out to
Gotcha.
the marketplace to kind of get it in even tighter shape. And that's just helpful to have someone's perspective, especially someone who has so much experience working in the industry and kind of knows the climate and what people are looking for. So yeah,
We call that
and
an
then
editorial agent, someone who can, also edit, which not all agents do, apparently. I just found that out. Not all agents do
yes,
that.
no, totally. But so that was fabulously helpful as well. And
It
then yeah,
almost feels like it's an impossible dream as a writer, especially in the fiction genre, because not only do you have this daunting task of writing 300 pages, oh my gosh, with this hope and a dream that you will find an agent, because you can't just go to a publisher. I mean, you can self-publish, but most
yes.
people don't want to do that. And then hoping someone will take you on, that's the next step. And then you have to edit and then go to hope that someone else will accept what you and your agent did together. And did you always feel like it was a hope in the dream and it was like a long shot, or did you know instinctually that perhaps this was going to sell?
I mean, I think it's a combination of the two. I mean, some days you're like, this is gonna sell and it's gonna sell for 17 million fucking dollars. And then other days you are literally like weeping on your couch, praying
Yeah.
it sells to one person for $2. Do you
Hmm.
know what I mean? So I think like many artists feel this and many creators feel this is that kind of mix of like insane confidence, then insane doubt. But it is definitely a leap. And I mean, honey, for anyone going through, I mean, just for anyone in life,
Yeah.
I highly recommend therapy. But it was, but seriously, I mean, I think
Yes.
that also when you've poured so much of yourself into one project, and it's also really personal, and like,
Yeah.
I also think it's good to have support, as you go through that process, because honey, it is, as I'm sure it's nerve-wracking as hell.
It's like the hardest thing I've ever had to do was to try to sell a book and then also write a book. But what is your writing process like? Are you stop and go? Do you have to go to a retreat? Do you have to disconnect? Are you a 9 to 5 kind of writer? Like what was your schedule like for Yes Daddy?
Yeah, cold brew early in the morning, honey. That's my
Ooh.
secret to success. And I maintain a fairly regular schedule. I'm pretty regimented, which I think um, helps a lot, just to get into like a regular rhythm, even if I'm not feeling inspired, even if what I churn out is crap that day. Like I think that for me, having that regular schedule is really helpful. And then
Mhm.
I also work, I mean, from this book, I kind of work from I kind of started just exploring, and then eventually, once I got a few chapters in, I was like, oh, okay, I think I need an idea of where the narrative is going. So I did work from more of an outline, but then the outline was constantly living and breathing as the book was changing.
Wow.
It was changing things. So it's kind of like I write a little bit, I discover some new things, then I went to change the outline, and then I went back to writing, discover more things, and change the outline. So it was kind of like a back and forth. So following my intuition while also following an outline and kind of navigating between those two.
That's so beautiful. And so from 2016 to 2019 you were writing and then it went on sale in 2019 or 2020?
2000, Oh my
It's
God.
all a blur right now after the pandemic.
It is, I know. I'm like, wait, what was I doing? Last year, yeah, 2019. 2019 is
Gotcha.
when I sold it in the, yes, in the winter, like the early 2019.
Before the
Um,
pandemic.
yeah, yeah, wait. No, wait. Yes,
I know.
before the pandemic, because yes, then 2020, right? Oh
Yeah,
my
I
God.
think that's probably what
I'm
happened because
starting to
we
see now.
sold mine in October 2019, I believe. And it's a summer debut as well. But
Yeah,
Jonathan, we have to talk.
yeah.
Hello, about Amazon. This is turning into a television show. We are burying the lead and we are bad journalists. But I did want to save this best for last. Tell me about that process of adapting to a television series. How did that even happen before your book debuted? I mean, major.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's like a real hunger in Hollywood for intellectual property, which is like books or articles or things to base series on.
Yes, yes.
So I think I wrote this book kind of at that time, and actually we went out with the film rights to the book simultaneously as the manuscript was being submitted to publisher. So I was
Oh
like,
my gosh.
we got a development deal, we better have a book to publish. I really hope. But fortunately, it all worked out. And yeah, I mean, I felt very, very lucky to find a production partner. It's this producer, Patrick Moran, who is gay.
Major.
He's fabulous. He has an overall at Amazon. He used to be the head of ABC Studios. And he just,
I
I mean, to
love
me, it
it.
was important to have queer people working on this because it is like you were saying earlier, like there is kind of this inherent understanding of a queer world and a queer landscape, and I felt that that was very important in terms of
Yeah,
the
that authenticity.
adaptation.
Yes.
You know, I don't want Chris Pratt up here like adapting this book. Do you know what I mean though? Like
Can you
I
imagine? That would be kind of genius. I'd be like, oh,
twist. Yeah, no thank you, Chris Pratt. I mean, yeah, no thank you. So yeah, so it was so that was fantastic. And then they Patrick found a filmmaker who I actually knew as well, this fabulous queer filmmaker named Stephen Dunn. He directed
mhm.
this queer movie called Closet Monster. He also did the queer episode of Little America that featured Chi-Chi DeVane, R.I.P., one of my
Yes.
favorite queens of all time.
Wow.
And he's also doing the upcoming reboot of Queer as Folk for Peacock.
Major.
Yeah, so and he's so talented and he has such a good vision for the translation of the book to screen. And so I just, yeah, feel very lucky to be in fabulous queer hands who also like want to, you know, approach the subject matter with, I think, the kind of weight and reverence that it
You're
deserves.
so major. That is so iconic. When is the show coming out?
Don't know. I mean, Hollywood, honey, she
I know.
takes forever. So
Like
we'll see.
books. Like books
Yes.
too. It's just you have to be very humble and just take it a day at a time. We have
Yeah.
a question from the audience. Someone named Dia Hana. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Do you think your next book will be as dark as Yes, Daddy?
It's interesting. It I'm working on it right now. It's in its baby zygote gestational phase, and
Cute.
it's not ready to quite be spoken about in public, but I will say it's pretty dark. It might not be, no, I think it is maybe as dark as Yes Daddy. It's dark in a different way, but I will say that it is another kind of genre mashup, but this one a little bit more horror and sci-fi blend.
Oh
But
my
yeah,
god.
I love it. I love some dark subject matter. I mean, I think that's just me reading Stephen King as like a child well before I
Yes.
ever should have. So
Love.
I think my imagination, just for better or worse, is a little bit dark.
I love that so much. So you are starting on your next question.
Yeah, my next novel. Yeah.
Your next book. I'm sorry, your next book.
Yes. You know, we'll see. It's like you write one book and you think, well, certainly now I know how to write a novel, and all novels henceforth will be easy. But it's like I'm doing something different in this book, and it's like, wow, this book is a completely different animal, and it's like learning how to write a novel all over again. And I guess this is just what I'll do until, I don't know, I die.
How does it feel to have the book now in the world? You've been pregnant with it since 2016. You birthed it just
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, or a week ago. 2 weeks ago? 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, or almost a month, I think. Yeah.
Oh, a month ago. Oh my gosh, so
I
crazy.
know, time literally flies by.
Birthed a month ago. How does it feel now that Yes, Daddy is out in the world for all to read?
I think it's just like a huge, it's lovely. I mean, it's like giving birth. It kind of feels like a child out in the world, and now it has its own identity, and it's connecting with readers, and it just feels fabulous, because it is, I mean, that's really why I wrote it, is to connect with readers. And I think that that's been what's so rewarding about having it out in the world and living on its own, is that, you know, so I get so many messages from people who just see themselves in the narrative, just really respond to the book, or feel really moved by the book. And that, I think, is the most gratifying part of it, is just connecting with people who love it.
And we're also going to take more questions if you have any. But this book, I mean, the cover is just so major. The colors. I mean, talk about the cover of the book. Like, was this your idea? Like, who is this person? Like, how did you come up with the arts for this? Like, I want to know everything.
Well, I have to say, it's an incredible designer. Her name's Kelly Winton. And I mean, this was the first cover that we got. And
oh my God.
I mean, yeah, I mean, there was no, I mean, so many people talk about kind of like horror stories of going back and forth and trying to find the right cover, and having, you know, someone who doesn't get it. I mean, I think everyone was just on the same page from the beginning, and I felt so lucky. And what I love about it is that it kind of does the same thing that I hope the narrative does, which is kind of draw you in with like a dazzling image, which seems on its surface very like beautiful and kind of placid and relaxing. But then, I mean, if you'll notice, there's literally blood in the water at the bottom. So it has that kind of darkness. So it's like this kind of, I think it mimics the experience, I hope, of the book, and draws people in a way visually that the book does through words. So yeah, I felt very lucky to.
It's just so genius, like the details of the cover too. And if you haven't picked up this book, Yes, Daddy, and this is me, I cannot lie, it is one of my favorite books of the year. I slurped it up in a matter of 2 days. I was like, cancel everything. Let me just read this book. And it was just so genius. And you did such a fantastic job, Jonathan. You should be so proud. We have another question from Pilar. Can you talk a little bit about characters who were particularly fun to write or difficult to write? That is such a great question.
Oh, lovely. Yes, I think that Jonah was, I think, difficult to write. I think because there's some of me in him. I think that it required some self-reflection. I also wanted to create, you know, really complex characters. So there was a lot of research that went into his kind of emotional state and the ways that he goes through trauma. I think the most fun characters to write, I think, are, I mean, not when they're doing horrific things, but kind of the satire that skewers these kind of horrific, wealthy assholes, for lack of a better word. I mean, to kind of lean into that grotesqueness can be fun, to kind of really skewer the horrific people in the book. So there is like a dinner scene in the Hamptons, which is just so kind of grotesque and dark, and that I do have fun with those kind of grotesque details, and really kind of skewering and satirizing wealthy assholes.
And some people you just want to, I mean, I won't spoil it for you, but some characters I'll just like, I know who this is. I've met this person. I'm like
Yes,
livid,
totally.
which means that you did such a fantastic job. Another question. I saw someone on Goodreads compare Yes Daddy to My Dark Vanessa. Do you see similarities?
I actually haven't read My Dark Vanessa. I should. I read so much during the process, but that was one that kind of came out around the same time, and it
Oh.
never made it onto my TBR. But it is getting a lot of comparisons to My Dark Vanessa, and I've heard so many people who love that book, and I do think that it's another kind of Me Too story, and kind of a really important story of the genre. So yeah, I definitely heard that. I've also heard comparisons to A Little Life. There's a lot of comparisons, which I
I
did
was
read A
just
Little
gonna
Life.
say that.
Yes, which I loved. I mean, I know it's a very controversial book,
Loved.
but I did actually love it. I mean, it is relentless in a way which I don't think my book is. I think that my book explores trauma, and it is dark, and I think that's where the comparison often comes from for a lot of people. But I did also work toward. I mean, my book moves towards. I mean, no spoilers, but I can say that it moves towards a hopeful
Yes.
conclusion, and I think that that is also what differentiates it. It's also not 800 pages long, although I did tear through those 800 pages of A Little
Same.
Life.
But the difference between that book and yours is I almost feel like the trauma was this moment and then you're getting out of the trauma. Whereas the other book, A Little Life, is trauma after trauma after trauma and re-traumatizing. You're like, no, oh my gosh, oh, this happened again. And sometimes it was just like overwhelming. I mean, beautifully done, obviously. Such a great, great book. But yours kind of got to it and then we're moving through it and then moving on to, throughout the book, which I really did appreciate. William Rogers asks, how did you avoid falling into the trap of gay stereotypes, entrapping the narrative, and turning off the reader when writing the book?
Yes, well, that's a great question. I mean, I think that for me, it's about ensuring that you're creating characters that are complex and real. And so, I mean, for me, for my characters, I do actually often use real life people. Not that I'm saying I'm using real life people and there are real life people in this book, but I do use kind of kernels of people's personalities or people that I know intimately. I find that that is helpful for me when I'm forming a character, because it helps me create a character that's fully realized, and avoid leaning on cliche or leaning on
Mm-hmm.
stereotype, um, and kind of imbuing a character with nuance and making sure that they're human and that they're layered. So yeah, I think that's really how I kind of avoid. Also, we don't like cliches. We've seen plenty of them. So I I really, yeah, I did want to make sure to push against, stereotypes, especially that queer people might see gay men.
Which I think you did a fantastic job to create three-dimensional characters in everyone, even if we hated them. We're like, I kind of understand their intentions and where they're coming from too. Um, and I know that we are coming to the end of this conversation. Please let us know if you have any other questions before that.
And
But
before we end, I also want to say you must get a copy of David's book as well, which is coming out. What is June 22nd, right?
June 22nd, and you have the galley, but this is the final
I know.
version.
I'll put away my galley so you can
It
see it's
is
gorgeous
metallic
hardcover.
and beautiful, and I don't know, it's like full color too, but it's the history of men, makeup, and masculinity from the beginning of time to now. And so it is a nonfiction, but it proves that pretty is pretty powerful. From the beginning of time, we're going back 50,000 years ago to our Neanderthal cousins who used foundation and ground up pyrite for highlighters, to then the Vikings, who are these gruff men who also had beauty kits next to their belts, to every culture around the globe and throughout time beautified with men and mask identifying folks. And so I really do hope that this can be a beacon of light, especially during Pride in June. But it's also, something that I'm super proud of. And Jonathan, I'm so happy and heartened that you felt that it was is worthy of your time.
Well, I mean, it's stunning. It's like it's so comprehensive. Like when you say Neanderthals, you mean literal Neanderthals all the way to BTS. I mean,
Yes.
so it is like it's so comprehensive and so beautifully done and so inclusive of so many cultures and so many different types of beauty. I just think that it is absolutely powerful. And also, like, there's so many figures. I mean, Billy Porter, Frank Ocean. The nuances that you explore and kind of the figures that you've landed on. Also, I mean, this is a kind of getting to minutia, but Max Factor, I had no idea the history behind like the first commercial makeup brand. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
it's wild. There's so much essential history in this book, and I think that it's going to redefine beauty this Pride Month.
Well,
So
you
get
know
it.
what? You
No.
are also making history through Yes, Daddy. And this is just such a perfect, perfect book for Pride and for every day. And it is on shelves everywhere. So if you haven't gotten this, please do go to Unabridged Bookstore or to your local bookstore if you don't live in Chicago to grab this book. It is that good. And it is an essential read, especially if you're part of our community. And, you know, I think that that's all the questions that we had for now. Jonathan, is there anything else that you would like to add in our
Oh,
beautiful
I think
conversation?
we covered it all. You have been absolutely fabulous. And yeah, I just thank everyone for coming and thank you for, hosting. Love it.
Thank you. Of course, anything for my fellow HMH, well, now Mariner Books. It changed to
Yes, we've
Mariner.
changed publishing companies.
We changed to HarperCollins now, so we're
Yeah.
adopted by another parent, but now you are under HarperCollins as well. But anything for my book sibling, I'm just so honored to be in company and to be a fellow author, to say that word that I'm an author, and I
Yes,
could even have this
honey.
conversation with someone like Jonathan Parks-Ramage. It's just such an honor.
Yes, so fabulous.
Well,
So,
thank you everyone, and have an amazing Pride. Jonathan, I'll see you soon in LA.
yes, we're going to have a moment.
We're gonna have a moment. Okay.
All right.
Bye
Bye,
everyone.
honey.